Everybody. This is the July edition of Textile of the Month series. We'll be talking about Rouketsuzome today, which is basically wax resistor batik. Now, samples of batik go all the way back to the 700s, the Heian period or not, excuse me, not a period in Japan. This is an example of that, probably stamped. And this one is labeled as being stamped, but it looks as if, since it's a fairly large piece, that it was a combination of stamp and direct application of the batik. So you can see in both these samples, the colors have lasted all these years. It's amazing. And you can also see that there are many layers of application, the first being the white, and then the fabric being dyed yellow, and then that area being covered in the background being dyed. This is also from that same area. You can see the phoenix. This is just a scrap of, I believe, from a piece of furniture that was left over. So what exactly goes into wax resist? Well, this is the Indonesian version of it. Wax resist didn't originate in Japan. It came to Japan both from Southeast Asia and from mainland China. The Indonesians used the little tool you just saw, jantung, as well as this stamping method. These are copper blocks with lots of highly detailed patterning done with the copper itself, heated, the wax is melted, and that then is pushed against normally cottons. And once the wax is cooled, they'll go ahead and dye the various natural dyes that they have. Now, the Japanese, without actual knowledge of the copper blocks nor the Chinese methods of doing it, developed their own, looking at the results and trying to figure out how to do it, which is always fun. And they developed a brush application method. So you saw the brush in use a moment ago. This is the result of that particular artist's work. Let's go on to a kimono in production. You can see that some of the outlines have already been drawn with a very fine brush. Some of the colors have been applied, and now the artist is going over the colored areas with additional wax to protect them from further dyeing. Then the background will be dyed or other colors will be applied to it. And with most Japanese dyeing, it's stretched up in the traditional manner using the harite and shinshi, and the wax is heated off to the side. Here again is the same type of setup. You can see the hot wax. The wax he's using is a combination of paraffin and beeswax. The beeswax keeps it soft, the paraffin keeps it stiff. So it's a matter of adjusting the ratio of those two primary elements. If you're after that crackled look that some of us identify with batik, you would add more paraffin to it so it makes it more brittle, okay? And so very carefully going on and keeping the heat just right so that it's able to convey the wax while still liquid, but not so hot that the wax will wick and destroy the design. So it's a very careful balancing act. The outlines of those flowers, the white part we see, is what will be dyed. The rest of it's being protected. And as you can see here, he's actually following the weave of the fabric. So this is a jacquard, and the jacquard has several different textures to it, and that will affect how the color is received by the cloth. So there is no pre-sketch, there is no outline for this. And again, viewed from the underside, you can see the shinshi doing its job. So these different shades of red that you're seeing actually are all the same color. They're simply different refraction of light depending on how the weave is structured in that particular spot. So the only real resist section is the white portion that we saw. Now, this is a different image, a different artist. He's dyed the background blue first with the shading, and you can see the wax has been applied here to protect the background, leaving this blue stem exposed, which he will later go ahead and dye yet a different color. So he's painting in all of his details right now. Very careful, very meticulous work. He's being interviewed at the same time, and quite frankly, I'd be quite annoyed trying to do my job and having someone interview me. You don't want to mess up on this. It's a lot of work to get to the stage where he was. And these are some of the traditional brushes, the peony brushes, the jizome brushes. You've seen these used in a number of other processes, primarily Katazome, but also the Sarasazome that we've covered in the past. Now, notice what he's doing here. He has this fude style brush with the tip to apply the color, and he's using the surikomi brush to shade it out. That's exactly the same thing that we saw as the technique in dyeing bingata. The difference is in bingata, you're usually putting one fairly dark spot of color and shading it out. Whereas because this is such a very delicate shade that he's after, he builds it up with very pale colors a little at a time to get exactly the right nuance he's seeking. Now going on to another color, you can see him doing that same step from a different angle. Notice that he's putting the drop of dye on the wax. We often do that in rice paste resist also. That allows you to carry the color off the resist onto the fabric. You have much more control when seeking nicely shaded umbered colors. Okay, it's very hard to get that delicate, soft glow of color if you're using a juicy brush. So notice you can't even see any color at all in the surikomi brush. It's just on the very, very tip. And again, viewed from underneath. And here's the finished piece. Very delicate, very beautiful work. So I want to present to you one particular artist. Her name is Chio Kato. Very beautiful work, a very skilled batik artist, Rouketsuzome. And here she is drawing out her initial pencil design, which she then transferred to her cotton canvas. And she's applying the wax paste to the various details she wants to resist. So here she's using the brush to apply very, very fine lines. This is a winter scene. So right now she's applying it to the white, which means this will be the snow sitting on top of the branches in the finished piece. And she'll go back and apply color underneath, of course, to give the shadow to the branch. Very, very careful work is required. Steady hand is required and a very high quality brush. So here you see she has some of the darker undercolors added to the branches. She's going in and filling in other areas that are going to be resisted. The brush is quite versatile. Okay, and she has her general outline here. There are a few details. The dog is already finished with the colors that she chose to use for him. Might be a little bit hard for you to imagine how this is going to wind up, but she has the image clearly in her mind. Using a natural sea sponge at this point, she's going along and stippling in little dots to give textures to the trees in the background. And then just as with katazome or many of yuzenzome, she's using this large jizome brush. First, in her case, because it's wax and it's not water soluble, she's applying water to the entire piece, then going back over the top and applying her dyes to allow her to get very delicate, very soft pastel buildup of colors. And here you can see she's going in for her next shade. Okay, she's gone back in, put a few details on the little girl in the image. And here again, she's wetting the fabric first, and she'll go over the top of that with her dyes. Notice how she's holding the surikomi brush. It's pretty much perpendicular to the surface of the fabric. That's how these brushes are designed to be used. That allows the tip of every little hair to work itself down into the weave to make sure you get good color penetration. Okay, so she's built up her blues now, getting towards the end, ready to wash out the wax, to boil out the wax. And now here we have the finished piece. Isn't this sweet? Just a little girl out for a walk with her dog. Very delicate shades. We tend to think of batik as being a little bit hard, a little bit coarse, a little bit folksy, which is quite beautiful. But this also shows you the very delicate, nuanced, sensitive mood that can also be created through the medium of roketsu. So let's look now at just a range of um, sample garments, textiles, and things done in Rouketsu. All of these are done with the wax resist. This is just to sort of give you a quick scan of all the different types. Notice the spotted design there. That's called Tatakizome, and we'll show you a little bit more about that in just a second here. The blues were all dyed with natural indigo. This beautiful piece of birch trees was also dyed with natural indigo, which is what the little banner there tells us. It's Awa indigo, which is the Tokushima area. And on the right, again, you see the speckled. Now, to get that speckled look, you take the brush, dip it in hot wax, and then basically swap it against your hand to splatter the drops all over the surface. Now, that might seem easy, but it takes quite a great deal of skill to create an evenness over the entire surface of the cloth. Okay, we have very highly detailed patternings. Some of these may or may not be stamps, most likely applied with brush. There's another method too that you can apply patterning, and that's with a roller. Okay, and that seemed a bit more in industrial approaches to dyeing. And beautiful birch trees. Again, very delicate colors. The splatter painting. Notice the stripes. Notice the splatter. Okay, and this wobbly line was most likely done by hand, but it could also very equally likely have been done with this roller method I mentioned. Okay. Wax being non-water soluble allows you to have a different type of nuanced shading than you might be able to easily achieve with katazome using a water-based resist. No matter how much scrubbing you do with the wax, it doesn't dissolve away. These are some other examples done with the roller method I mentioned. So let's stop a minute and look at let's look at the roller here for just a second. These are really interesting. So as you can see, there is a wood base, looks a little bit like a rolling pin. There is the surface relieves high relief area, which is what will come in contact with the fabric. And you can see there's a bit of wax caked up in some of these. So like any repeating pattern on a roller, like the ancient Sumerian clay stamps and so forth, they have a cylindrical pattern that repeats every time it makes one revolution. So what you need is a second set. You need a setup whereby these little metal rods that go through the middle rest on either side of your platform, and then something needs to apply to feed the melted wax to the cylinder as it turns and comes in contact with the cloth. I'm sure you can imagine what that's like. Very, very clever way of speeding up this whole process. Now, this is not a Japanese stamp roller. This is simply something from Amazon that I looked up quickly because it's used in cooking. You can find rolling pins with these high relief designs. They're quite common in Scandinavian cooking. They're common in Mexican cooking, certainly. I have one in my home, and they're great for doing textured cookies and that sort of thing. So you might be able to adapt something like this into your own batik piece if you're interested in playing around a little bit. Okay, and here that item is in action. So here's the roller itself, and the fabric would be fed through and come out the metal bars on the other end. This is one done that same way with a bit more of a crackle surface to it, so harder wax, therefore more paraffin was used. This is using softer wax, but again, done with this roller system. And this is the label from that particular bolt. What it says is Kusaki Rouketsu, which means naturally dyed batik fabric. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be detailed. Let me back up just a moment. Even this beautiful, simple design is quite effective. Wax was used, no cracking, no fancy shading, no detail of little patterns or speckles, just very simple, basic resist to create an exquisite pattern. It can be very soft and shaded, such as the tulip flowers you see here. Couple more artists I want to make sure that you know about. Kiranda Sterling Benjamin is somebody I really admire. She does absolutely incredible roketsu work. She has this book out called Rouzome, which can be ordered from Amazon. There's a new paperback version out also. This is an older version of it. I highly recommend you check it out. I'll put a link in the video below. And then the next artist is Ina Kozel. I'm going to stop. Well, let me stop at the next section here. Ina has sort of a fun story. A very creative person who went to Japan to study the wax resist. She didn't speak Japanese, though, when she went. This was some maybe close to 40, 50 years ago that I talked to her about this. And as I recall the story, she went to this teacher in Kyoto to study her batik dyeing, very fascinated in the process, not speaking a word of Japanese. And he was very patient with her and showed her all that he was able in the short period of time that she had. She went back home and just really ran with it, applied herself, did all sorts of exquisite work, eventually took it back to show him. He looked at it, and he was quiet, and she was a little bit curious as to, and then he looked at it some more and was quiet. And finally he said, "What a delightful misunderstanding." Okay, so apparently she didn't completely comprehend all the directions he gave her. But Ina, being a very creative person and certainly motivated, took it all entirely in her own direction. And isn't that, after all, what we all want to do, especially with our mistakes? So, again, I recommend highly that if you're interested in this topic, Google Ina Kozel, Google Kinanda Sterling Benjamin. You might find her under Betsy Sterling Benjamin as well. They're both exquisite artists, and I sure every single one of you will enjoy their work immensely. Whoops. Sorry, I just lost. There we go. Okay, so that concludes today's talk.